The Egg and Food Lab is working to counteract the deficits and deprivations of the modern American food system. That's a modest ambition, right? It's just getting started, but has big plans and far-reaching connections, and it all starts with these folks.
My name is Roberto Mesa. I'm co-founder of the Ag and Food Lab and currently serve as the board president. I help write grants, I help fundraise, and also ensure proper board governance.
I'm David Emmerling. I'm the treasurer of the board of the Ag and Food Lab, and I also grow mushrooms.
I'm Eileen O'Rourke. I'm the interim executive director for the Ag and Food Lab, and I have the vision and I make decisions. And I'm really good at writing grants. I'm Taylor Jones. I'm the strategy and administration coordinator for the Ag and Food Lab, and I make sure that our day-to-day operations run smoothly.
This team of 4 champions is carving a new paradigm out of 35 acres in Bennett, Colorado, east of Denver. As it happens, this parcel of land sits in the direct flight path of the Denver airport.
So those partnerships really have helped the Ag and Food Lab exist and thrive as what we're trying to do in the future.
So it was an attempt to both solve challenges that we were facing, but then also see how we can create models.
So the Ag and Food Lab is...
We have cleaned up the sound as best we can, but you will still hear the occasional 747 throughout this section. On a related note, this is a working farm, and we filmed this on a day of triple-digit heat in August. You will see evidence of this throughout the video, and I thank you in advance for your understanding. The story of the Ag and Food Lab is the story of relationships. Relationships between the champions, between the lab and its partners, and between the land and our communities. The lab began as an offshoot of the East Denver Food Hub, which itself is the result of a collaboration between Roberto Mesa and David Demmerling. The Food Hub is a social enterprise that provides a model for local food aggregation and distribution. When it became clear that there was a need for more innovation and experimentation, Roberto and Dave co-founded the Ag and Food Lab as a way to connect small farmers with resources, education, and support in order to develop their businesses in a way that offers an equitable and sustainable livelihood.
So during the pandemic, the USDA announced a Families to Farmers food box program as part of their COVID response to food insecurity.
Roberto and Dave launched the lab on the Bennett property in 2022, where it now hosts multiple controlled environment grow facilities for microgreens, mushrooms, and more, that is optimized for minimal energy and water use. The facilities also include designated areas for experimentation with different growing techniques, new crops, and humane animal husbandry. The Ag and Food Lab exists to help small farmers become not just profitable, but sustainable for the land, the farmer, and the community. This is a big challenge, with some big difficulties to sort out. It can be very hard for small players to overcome the barriers to entry, such as lack of information, lack of technology, lack of access to land and capital, and this is where the lab steps in to help.
Now, a space where farmers with big ideas, big dreams, who don't have the resources that they need to make those dreams a reality, can come to get both community and capital and land to create the food system that we want to see in the world, which is a food system that regenerates land, it respects workers and animals.
The lab also exists to support the communities that these small farmers serve. Roberto and Dave put a high priority on supplying not just a big volume of edible stuff to families, but high-quality, highly nutritious fresh foods that support the comprehensive well-being of individuals and families receiving nutrition support.
We cultivated when we were starting East Denver Food Hub here with Nourish Colorado. They really have helped get really nutritious products that usually are more restaurant-focused, fine dining, and actually put them into food boxes, WIC boxes, and really that aspect of putting high nutrition instead of poundage of food is a really something we're always trying to weigh against, because a lot of the nutrition programs are based on pounds of food, not nutrition and how it affects people in their normal lives.
In much the same way as you might think of a business accelerator for tech startups, the Ag and Food Lab is a business accelerator for farm startups. The lab acts as a resource center for small farmers who need community and capital to expand their farms and reach minimum viable operational status. When talking to the champions, it was clear that the farmers were at the center of everything that they do.
Their input, their culture, everything that they bring forward needs to shine through in how we represent them and how we can help them out.
They continually emphasize the relationship between the farmers, the land, and the communities.
That we're regenerating land and farmers and the community that is being created.
I know that I keep talking about this, but it keeps being true. These folks are all about relationships and community building. When I asked Roberto how the farmers get connected with the lab's resources, this was his response.
To see how it can fit into this ecosystem. Dave and I are extremely open and collaborative people. That's how we like to work with one another. And all of the different projects that this farm has within its ecosystem have come forth through those relationships. I think one thing that we're noticing is balancing the relational way that we bring people in and get them excited to work here, and then systematizing that so that we can keep track, ensure follow through, and ensure success.
One of the relationships in this network is with the East Denver Food Hub. The hub offers consistent sourcing of high-quality fresh food to restaurants across the Front Range, as well as to food share programs, which means that folks experiencing food insecurity are not getting the unsold leftovers from King Soopers. They're getting the same beautiful ingredients that are showcased in five-star restaurants in places like Vail. How cool is that? The other side of the supply chain is the small farmers. A significant barrier to their success is the difficulty of accessing high-paying markets that allow for a fair price on their produce. By accessing the Ag and Food Lab's network, these farmers can elevate their businesses and begin to really thrive. The Ag and Food Lab is a physical establishment in Bennett, Colorado, and it also both has a network of partnerships and is its network of partnerships.
The other thing that needs to be said is that the lab is not just the land, these 35 acres, that it's already has had impact with the San Luis Valley, where where there's mushroom growers there that came here to learn more about how we're growing the mushrooms.
Beyond the aforementioned East Denver Food Hub, Ag and Food Lab has partnerships with Natural Resources Conservation Service, the NRCS, the Colorado State University Extension Service, Compost Colorado, Spirit of the Sun Food Share, and Nourish Colorado. These organizations provide a multitude of supports and services for their audiences, from horticultural education to composting opportunities to food equity advocacy. Starting off in farming is exceedingly difficult. You have to have land, water or water rights, time available from other employment, horticultural knowledge and skills, transportation, access to markets, etc.
We are working to try to get Miguel on the land. He has a background in agriculture as a farm worker. He is currently growing peppers on various plots spread out throughout Bennett County, or
Adams County.
Spread out. He's currently growing peppers on several plots spread out through Adams County. We want to help him consolidate that into one piece of property where he can focus on growing things without having to drive around. Now, he already has a lot of the knowledge and experience, but he doesn't necessarily know how to connect with suppliers and get his product to market. And we provide wraparound services in that regard to help connect him with the resources.
The Ag and Food Lab is working to identify these barriers and provide services to dismantle them. Beyond the supports that Taylor just described, the Ag and Food Lab offers assistance with tapping into grant funding and other capital resources.
Some of the things that the lab does is that we look for resources and capacity building opportunities and we go to the state and we go to the Department of Agriculture and we get grants and we get loans and we do all of that paperwork so that the farmers who are out working in the field and don't have to do it. So that's part of our job, is to facilitate getting things like tax credit refunds for purchasing of equipment that farmers might not necessarily know that even exists. We can connect them with that. We can connect them with resources to help get them off the ground.
Yet another key piece of the Ag Lab's services is helping their farmers gain GAP certification, Good Agricultural Practice certification, which is a requirement for access to many consumer markets. Now that we know what the Ag and Food Lab does, let's look at how it does it. The Ag and Food Lab grows multiple products on its 35-acre site, primarily by housing Emerald Gardens Microgreen Farm and Sugar Moon Mushrooms grow containers. Emerald Gardens shares space with the lab portion of the Ag and Food Lab, with a large section of their growing environment devoted to experimental techniques and crops.
This is a cilantro.
This is a cilantro.
Yeah, so these are the cilantro plants. These are going to be grown to full maturity.
So what's the experiment part of it?
We're using, so as you can see, these tables are the flood and drain system. So essentially they flood once a day and then they drain. The flooding gets water to the plants, the draining gets air to the plants. The okra seeds are from Sudan.
Oh, cool.
So we're trialing them, and as well as some.
I imagine the Sudanese know something about arid farming.
Yes. Yeah, so we have okra here and also out in the field to kind of see what works best.
The Emerald Gardens part of the operation is a modern iteration of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world brought into today's agriculture system. Roberto grows many kinds of microgreens, sunflowers, radishes, arugula, cilantro, broccoli, in the racks of industrial shelving irrigated by just a few seconds of water a few times per day. I personally hate cilantro, but I fully support the rest of these crops.
So it's just a fine kind of fiber made out of jute, and then we seed it there, and it alleviates a lot of labor necessary if we're trying to like if we were to seed them in soil, it would be a lot of time and a lot of labor. So this way the guys just cut the fabric, put it in the tray, germinate it, and then transfer it over.
Awesome. How are the mats reused then, or are
The mats,
they recycled?
they're composted.
Microgreens are grown on thin strips of burlap, which serves as a substrate for the seeds to sprout from. They don't need soil because they are harvested before the sprouts need any more energy or nutrients than what is contained in the original seed pod. They're harvested quickly, in less than a week from germination, then quickly shipped out to their destinations in restaurants, grocery stores, and food boxes. Sugar Moon Mushrooms is Dave Demerling's darling. It lives in 3 shipping containers that have been converted to controlled environment growing stations.
We are in controlled environment agriculture, but we are in a shipping container, so we're still a little bit have to deal with the elements outside. So if it's -21 outside, I gotta heat things up just a little bit more.
They're heated in the winter, cooled in the summer, well ventilated year-round, and always carefully controlled for humidity. We didn't wear masks on camera because we were only in the containers for a few minutes. Linger too long, breathing in the ambient air, and you can get something called mushroom lung, where spores take root in your lungs. No thank you. I don't want to die yet.
Mushrooms are humans. They breathe oxygen and produce CO2. One of the biggest things in here is cycling in fresh air and cycling out the CO2.
The mushrooms start as spores floating in otherwise sterile liquid that are injected into bags of substrate. The spores then germinate and colonize the bags with their thread-like mycelium until the substrate is entirely consumed.
And you can see these small dots. Those are what's starting out to be these bigger dots. And then they slowly take over the entire bag.
And this is like the mycelium of the fungus growing out from the source?
Absolutely. So those little green spawns are the start of the mycelium in another place, but we're throwing them into something else, and then that mycelium just multiplies and multiplies until it gets to a hard block.
This is really solid. It's like, it's not movable at all anymore, whereas this is really just the soil. So it like binds the whole thing together into a big solid mass.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then the mushrooms fruit out of this mass.
So once it gets to this size and this state where it's at, then you has the ability to start fruiting, and that's in the other container.
After full colonization, the bags are moved to the fruiting environment where oxygen and humidity prompt the organisms to fruit out into the beautiful mushrooms that we see here.
Can
I touch it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it's beautiful. It feels very firm and cool, and almost velvety.
Always pretty.
Always beautiful.
After the mushrooms are harvested, they're packed into boxes and sent off to their forever homes, restaurants and food boxes across the Front Range. The mushroom growing containers are cooled by conventional air conditioning units. The larger greenhouse, where the microgreens and experimental crops are housed, is temperature controlled by a geothermal heating cooling system and a ginormous evaporative cooler.
The reason why we have these tubes is because this is what we call a climate battery, or a ground to air heat transfer system. What that allows us to do is suck air from the top. You can see this column right here. As the warm air collects in the ceiling, it's pumped down about 4 or 5 feet down into the foundation through a series of tubes that disperse that air into the soil. When it comes up here, that air is a steady 50 to 55 degrees year round, so that we can regulate the temperature in the wintertime and the summertime,
Nice.
and alleviates our dependence on external heating and cooling elements.
The Ag and Food Lab is working to address serious inequities and insustainabilities in our food systems. Talking with Dave and Roberto and Taylor and Eileen brought home some really critical points to me, namely that the biggest challenges to feeding our communities are time and expectation, which are the two things that the so-called standard American diet nails down tight. Quick aside, the standard American diet, the acronym appropriately, the SAD diet, is a thing of fascination for me, and I highly recommend that anyone interested read the body of work of Michael Pollan, who has done some really great deep dives into our modern food systems. But let's get back to time and expectation. With the SAD diet and modern food system, we've created, if not foods, then at least food products that are shelf-stable for years and that are totally divorced from any discernible origin in anything that grows out of the ground. These food products are assembled using materials that come from agricultural products that have been broken down into molecules. The processing takes a whole food like a kernel of wheat and, through manual and chemical processes, breaks that kernel down into chains of carbon and hydrogen. These chains are then reassembled into a kibble of breakfast cereal or a candy bar or what have you. When you break the natural plant structures all the way down into chains of carbon atoms, it doesn't much matter what plant you start with. You can break a kernel of corn or a soybean down into identical carbon chains. If you've ever read an ingredient list and it says something like, quote, corn or soybean oil, close quote, this is because the manufacturers can swap out carbon chains of any origin, and so they choose whatever's cheapest at the moment of manufacture. The resulting food products are cheap to purchase and they never go bad. There's no loss to value or quality, even if it takes months or years to get them into the hands of consumers. Processing food products has removed that time limit that food systems were subject to for millennia. You have a finite amount of time to get a potato into the hands of a cook, but a bag of potato chips can sit on the shelf for years without refrigeration or other preservation technique. Time ceases to be a limit in this food system. The modern food system has also trained us to have a very specific expectation about every bite of food product that we eat. We know exactly what every single chip in the bag of Cooler Ranch Doritos will taste like, no matter when or where we purchase that bag. By comparison, every carrot that you grow in a garden will have a subtly different taste and texture. Every heirloom apple has its own unique shape. We've lost the appetite for variety that natural foods supply. The small farmers working with the lab are counteracting that learned preference. They're producing food that has all the gorgeous variation and nuance that has been lost in our race to food standardization. But when the audience has been trained to prefer those standardized products and expect a specific taste and texture with every bite, retraining them to appreciate and enjoy natural unprocessed foods in their non-standardized presentations is uphill work. The Ag and Food Lab is trying to change this terrifyingly opaque origin story of processed foods. What struck me the most in these conversations, again, is how time was the limiting factor. They grow microgreens and mushrooms so they can turn around the harvest in the fewest number of days. They have a distribution network that's trying to rush these harvested products into marketplaces before the food spoils, because it is real food and it's not a shelf-stable food product. There's just a tiny amount of time between harvesting the produce and when it starts to go bad, and getting it to the eaters in days, if not hours, is really critical. The truth is that we as a society cannot continue to kick the can down the road by sticking with our industrial food production systems. It's simply unsustainable. We need new, sustainable, and scalable systems that treat people, animals, and the land fairly, justly, and these 4 champions at the Food and Ag Lab are trying to do just that. So thank you to all of these people who have contributed and were kind enough to show us around their property and discuss their operation with us. Thank you again.